If you want to know what $3 billion smells like, it's not old leather or expensive cologne. It smells like ozone, lukewarm filtered water, and the terrifying, antiseptic silence of a conference room on the 45th floor, where the air conditioning is set specifically to keep human empathy at absolute zero. I was sitting there, staring at the signature line on a contract that was thick enough to stop a small caliber bullet, feeling the familiar hum of adrenaline that comes right before the ink hits the paper. This wasn't just a deal. This was the culmination of 6 months of my life spent in airport lounges and negotiating with regulatory bodies that make the IRS look like a charity organization. I'm Riley. I'm the strategic partnerships lead for a tech firm that everyone in New York thinks they know, but nobody actually understands. I'm the mechanic who goes down into the engine room of the Titanic and makes sure the turbines are actually turning while the captain is busy waving at the icebergs. The telecom deal was supposed to be impossible. Everyone said the Europeans would never sign over that level of data integration. But I knew something they didn't. I knew their lead negotiator had a weakness for strict punctuality and hated ambiguity. So, for 6 months, I was a metronome. I was precise, I was boring. And today, boring was about to pay for the new wing of our headquarters. Harold, our VP, was sitting across from me, sweating through a shirt that probably cost more than my first car. He looked like he was vibrating. That's the thing about the visionaries in this industry. They love the idea of the money, but they vomit at the sight of the work required to get it. I slid the pen across the mahogany table. The European counterpart, a man made of gray steel and silence, nodded at me. Not at Harold, at me. He signed. That split second of validation where the competence speaks louder than the title. If you're listening this and you've ever had to save your boss's ass without them even realizing they were in danger, do me a quick favor, hit subscribe and maybe upvote this story, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be cheaper than therapy and more satisfying than watching your ex trip on a sidewalk. It really helps get these confessions out there. So, the deal closes, champagne pops. Harold is suddenly the loudest guy in the room, slapping backs, talking about synergy and paradigm shifts like he didn't spend the last 3 meetings scrolling through golf course reviews on his iPad. I stood by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, feeling that quiet, steel-reinforced satisfaction. I thought the hard part was over. I thought the war was won, and I could finally take a weekend off to remember what my apartment looked like in daylight. I was an idiot. The hangover from the victory lasted exactly 48 hours. On Monday morning, Harold called an emergency all-hands meeting for the executive leadership team. Usually, these meetings are just Harold liking the sound of his own voice. But the energy was different. It was frantic, nervous. He walked in with a young woman who looked like she had been generated by an AI prompted with arrogant influencer with an MBA. She was wearing a blazer that was cut aggressively sharp and heels that were designed for sitting, not walking. "Team," Harold said, his voice cracking just a little, the way it always did when he was doing something he knew was defensible only by blood. "I want you to meet our new director of innovation. This is Harper." Harper. Of course her name was Harper. She didn't smile, she smirked. It was the kind of smirk you see on people who have never heard the word no without immediately following it with a call to a lawyer. Harold continued, "Harper comes to us with a fresh perspective from graduate school." He didn't mention which school. He didn't mention her previous experience, mostly because her LinkedIn profile probably listed Chief Vibe Officer at a startup that folded in 3 months. "Hi everyone," Harper said. Her voice had that vocal fry that sounds like sandpaper on a chalkboard. "I've been looking at the workflows here and honestly, it feels a little dinosaur. We're going to pivot. We're going to disrupt ourselves before the market disrupts us." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I looked around the room. The CFO was staring at his coffee cup like he wished it was whiskey. The general counsel was aggressively cleaning his glasses. No one said anything. They all knew who she was. We all knew Harold's last name, and we all knew hers. This wasn't a hire, it was an inheritance. "Riley," Harold said, pointing a sweaty finger at me. "Harper's going to be shadowing you on the upcoming Chen investment round. I want her to get her hands dirty on the big stuff immediately." The Chen investment, $3 billion. Wallace Chen, the man who ate executives for breakfast and used their business cards to pick his teeth. Harold wanted to throw this glitter-covered grenade into the bunker with the most dangerous investor in the hemisphere. "Shadowing?" I asked, keeping my voice level, the calm authority mask bolted tight to my face. "Harold, the Chen deal is in the delicate phase. Wallace doesn't like new faces. He'll love this face," Harper interrupted, winking, in a board meeting. "Besides, Riley, no offense, but your strategy seems a little traditional. I think Wallace wants to see the future." "The future," I repeated, deadpan. "Exactly," she said, leaning back and putting her shoed feet on the rung of the chair next to her. "I'm here to bring the juice." I looked at Harold. He looked away. He knew. He knew he was handing the keys to a Ferrari to a toddler who had only ever driven a tricycle in a padded room. But he was weak and she was his blood, and in corporate America, blood is thicker than competence, thicker than profit, thicker even than the survival instinct. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just nodded, picked up my notebook, and wrote a single line in my crisp architectural handwriting: document everything. The storm wasn't coming. It was already in the room, wearing designer perfume and looking at me like I was the help. I walked out of that meeting knowing two things. First, that this company was about to bleed, and second, that if I wasn't careful, Harold and his little princess were going to use me as the tourniquet. But they forgot one thing. I'm not the help. I'm the one who holds the keys to the vault, and I have a very, very long memory. The degradation of a high-functioning system is usually slow, like rust, but with Harper, it was fast, like pouring sugar into a gas tank. It started small. She would reply all to email chains she hadn't read, adding thoughts that were just rewordings of the subject line. She scheduled brainstorming sessions at 8 a.m. on Mondays, demanded we use a new project management software that was essentially just a glorified to-do list with emojis, and started referring to our engineers as creatives, which pissed them off so much productivity dropped by 15% in her first week. The real disruption began on the operational calls. We were dealing with a logistics partner in Singapore, a relationship I had cultivated over 4 years of midnight calls and cultural deference. We were discussing supply chain latency, boring, critical stuff. I had the flow. I was guiding the conversation toward a 4% margin adjustment. Then Harper chimed in. Guys, she interrupted, her voice booming over the Polycom speaker. Let's zoom out. What's the moonshot here? Why are we talking about shipping containers when we should be talking about drone swarms? Silence on the line, the kind of silence that costs money. Harper, I said, hitting the mute button on my end for a microsecond. We are discussing maritime law and customs clearance. Drones aren't legal in this airspace. Not with that attitude, she scoffed, unmuted. Look, Singapore team, can I call you Singapore team? We need to be agile. Forget the containers. Let's ideate on a digital-first delivery mechanism. The lead partner in Singapore, a man named Mr. Tan who had never made a joke in his life, cleared his throat. Miss Harper, are you suggesting we digitize physical hardware? Exactly, she snapped her fingers. Now you're getting it. I saw the bridge burning in real time. I had to step in. I physically leaned forward, blocking her from the microphone, and went into full damage control mode. I spent 20 minutes apologizing in code, soothing egos, and walking back her insanity without explicitly calling my boss's daughter an idiot. When the call ended, I was sweating. That went great, Harper said, scrolling through TikTok on her phone. I really felt we shook up their paradigm. You almost lost us the Asian market, I said, my voice low. You worry too much, Riley, she said, dismissively. Dad says you're risk-averse. That's why you're still in execution and not vision. I went to Harold. I walked into his office, closed the door, and laid it out. She's dangerous, Harold. She doesn't understand the product. She doesn't understand the regulatory environment. She just insulted Tan, Harold sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked older than he had a week ago. She's just finding her rhythm, Riley. She has energy. We need energy. I've been doing this a long time. Maybe you're just a little set in your ways. Just guide her. Be a mentor. I can't mentor a hurricane, Harold. Just make it work, he snapped, his eyes flashing with a mix of guilt and defensiveness. She's family, and there it was, the trump card. Logic didn't matter. Profit didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that she shared his DNA. 2 days later, the real bomb dropped. I came into the office to find the engineering lead, a guy named David who lived on Red Bull and sarcasm, banging his head against his desk. What happened? I asked. Your shadow happened, David groaned. Harper sent out the preliminary specs to the Chen investment team last night, without copying you. My stomach dropped. What did she send? She promised them the QuantumX integration, David said, by Q3. The QuantumX integration is theoretical, I whispered. It doesn't exist yet. Haven't even built the prototype. She told them it's beta tested and ready for scalability, David said. If we don't deliver that, the due diligence fails. The $3 billion goes away. I walked to my desk. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my laptop. I sat down and opened the secure server logs. I found the email. There it was, sent at 2 a.m., likely after a few glasses of wine, full of typos and catastrophic promises. You're literally crushing the tech game, RN, she had written to Wallace Chen's senior analyst. QuantumX is ready to go. I had a choice. I could let it burn. I could let the investors find out in due diligence that she lied and watch the deal implode. But if the deal imploded, the company collapsed. My stock options, my team's jobs, the years of work, all gone, so I fixed it. I spent the next 3 nights in the office, pulled in favors from 3 different R&D labs. I reworked the definitions of integration in the technical addendums to make them legally ambiguous enough to cover our asses, but specific enough to pass a casual glance. I built a bridge out of smoke and mirrors to cover the chasm she had dug. I didn't sleep. I survived on black coffee and rage. By Friday morning, the data room was updated. The lie was sanitized into a projected roadmap. The crisis was averted. Harper walked in at 10:30 a.m. holding a green juice. Hey, Riley, she chirped. Did you see the response from the Chen team? They're excited. Told you I had the magic touch. She had no idea what I had done. She thought her charm had worked. She thought the world actually operated on vibes. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt something shift. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was done. I opened a hidden folder on my encrypted drive labeled contingency. I dragged the original email she sent, the one with the lies, into the folder. Then I dragged the log of my corrections. Then I dragged the timestamped Slack messages where David confirmed the tech didn't exist. Good job, Harper, I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You really shook things up. I know, right? She beamed. I saved the folder. The paper trail had begun. She wanted to play visionary? Fine. I was going to play forensic accountant. And in corporate America, the accountant always wins in the end. Wallace Chen was not a man who appeared on magazine covers. He was the man who owned the publishing houses that printed the magazines. He was 70 years old, wore suits that cost more than my education, and had eyes that looked like two pieces of flint waiting to strike a spark. He didn't speak often, and when he did, never repeated himself. Dealing with Wallace was like playing chess with a grandmaster who was also holding a loaded gun under the table. The prep for the $3B investment meeting was a nightmare. Harold was hyperventilating in his office, popping beta blockers like Tic Tacs. Harper, on the other hand, was terrifyingly calm. She had spent the last week creating a slide deck that was 90% graphics and 10% incoherent gibberish. She insisted on leading the pitch. I have a connection with Wallace, she claimed. I can feel his energy. He wants to be inspired. He wants a return on equity, Harper, I said, trying to review the financial audits one last time. He doesn't care about inspiration. He cares about EBITDA. Bo ring, she sang-songed. Riley, you have to trust the narrative. So we walked into the boardroom. The air was thin. Wallace sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 lawyers who looked like they were bred in a lab to find loopholes. I took my usual seat at Wallace's right hand, the operator's seat. Harold sat on the left. Harper stood at the front, clicking her presentation clicker like it was a detonator. She started talking. It was a train wreck. It was a masterclass in vacuous corporate speak. She used words like synergy, holistic ecosystem, and crypto-adjacent leverage in the first 3 minutes. She flashed slides of happy people holding phones, stock photos of diverse handshakes, and a graph that had no y-axis, just an arrow pointing up labeled success. I watched Wallace. He didn't blink, he didn't take notes, he just stared at her. His face was a mask of absolute neutrality. It was the kind of silence that makes lesser men crumble, but Harper was immune to social cues. She kept going. She pivoted to her NFT strategy. And finally, she announced, beaming, we're going to launch a limited series of commemorative tokens for our Tier 1 partners. It's going to drive engagement through the roof. It's the metaverse, Wallace, it's now. Wallace slowly turned his head. He didn't look at Harper. He looked at Harold. Harold, Wallace said. His voice was soft, dry like old parchment. Are we selling technology or are we selling cartoons? Harold turned pale. It's a multi-pronged approach, Wallace. Harper is just highlighting the aspirational verticals. Aspirational, Wallace repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled milk. Then he looked at me. For the first time in the meeting, his eyes had life in them. He looked at me with a question that didn't need to be spoken. Are you seeing this? I gave him the smallest nod, a microscopic incline of the chin. I see it. I fixed the data room. The numbers are real, even if the presentation is a hallucination. Wallace turned his attention to the physical term sheet in front of him. It was a 100-page document that I had drafted, redrafted, and memorized. He flipped past the financials. He flipped past the regulatory compliance. He stopped on page 84. I knew exactly what was on page 84. Section 12, paragraph C, human capital retention. He took a gold fountain pen out of his pocket. He circled something on the page. He didn't write a note, just circled it twice. Then he looked up at Harper, who was now rambling about viral loops. Miss Harper, Wallace interrupted. Call me Harper, she smiled. Miss Harper, he continued, ignoring her request. Your enthusiasm is noted. Please sit down. I have questions about the supply chain integration. He turned his body away from her, effectively cutting her out of existence, and faced me. Riley. The latency figures in the Singapore market. Explain them. Harper's smile faltered. She stood there, clicker in hand, awkwardly frozen. I can take that, she stammered. The moonshot is Riley, Wallace said, sharper this time. I leaned forward. The latency is down 4% due to a renegotiated customs protocol, Wallace. We sacrificed some margin on the front end to guarantee 99.9% uptime. It's an Appendix B. Wallace nodded. Good, smart trade. He closed the folder. He kept his hand resting on it. Specifically, his hand was resting on the section he had circled. Harper sat down, sulking, checking her phone. Harold wiped sweat from his forehead. They thought they had survived. They thought Wallace was just being old school. But I knew better. Wallace Chen didn't circle things for fun. He had found the lever. He had found the one thing in that document that mattered more than the NFTs or the buzzwords or Harold's desperate grin. He had found the kill switch. And as he looked at me one last time before ending the meeting, I realized he was just waiting to see if anyone was stupid enough to press it. The retaliation was clumsy, which made it all the more insulting. If you're going to stab someone in the back in a corporate environment, you use a scalpel, not a rusty spoon. But Harper was all blunt force trauma. It started the Tuesday after the pitch meeting. I tried to log into the shared executive calendar to schedule the follow-up diligence call with Wallace's team. Access denied. A little red box popped up, Contact Administrator. I tried to open the Chen Deal final drafts folder on the server. Access denied. I sat back in my chair, sipping my lukewarm coffee. I didn't call IT. I knew what this was. This was the digital equivalent of changing the locks while your spouse is at the grocery store. Then came the email. It wasn't from Harper. It was from Harold, but the syntax was all wrong. Harold used commas like they were going out of style. This email was a stream of consciousness block of text. Subject, org chart realignment / vision forward Riley. As we pivot toward the closing of the Chen investment, we are looking at streamlining our leadership optics. Harper has expressed a desire to take point on the finalization phase to better align with the new innovation strategy. Given budget concerns and the need for a fresher narrative, your role is being reviewed for potential restructuring post-close. In the interim, please route all investor comms through Harper directly. We appreciate your support in this transition. Restructuring. Corporate speak for we're going to fire you the second the check clears. We need you to stay quiet until then. I read it twice. I felt the anger, sure, hot and sharp in my chest. I had built this department. I had saved their asses in Singapore. I had sanitized their data room. And now I was being restructured because a 28-year-old with an ego the size of Texas felt threatened because the investor asked me a question instead of her. But anger is a useless emotion in the boardroom. Anger makes you messy. Calculation makes you dangerous. I didn't reply immediately. I swiveled my chair to my secondary monitor, the one connected to my personal hard drive. You see, I'm not a rookie. I lived through the dot-com bust and the 2008 crash. I know that loyalty is a myth told by HR departments to keep salaries low. I had been mirroring the entire negotiation history to my private cloud for 6 months. Every email, every draft, every red line, every Slack message where Harper asked what does EBITDA mean lol. I opened the folder, it was all there. The Quantum X lie she sent, the log of me fixing it, the transcript of the call where she insulted the Singapore team, and most importantly the original term sheet where I had highlighted the clause Wallace circled. I smiled. It was a cold, tight smile. I hit reply on Harold's email. Harold understood. Efficient communication is key. I will direct all incoming queries to Harper. Just to clarify, Harper will be the sole signatory on the compliance deliverables for Wallace Chen. I want to ensure the chain of custody is clear for the audit. I pressed send. It was a trap. A beautiful, simple trap. By confirming she was the sole signatory, they were giving me a get-out-of-jail-free card for whatever disaster she was about to cause. And they were too stupid to see it. 10 minutes later, Harper walked by my glass-walled office. She didn't look at me. She was talking loudly on her phone. Yeah, I'm basically running the close. It's exhausting, but someone has to be the adult, right? She stopped, pivoted, and looked through the glass. She gave me a little wave. A dismissive, fingers-only wave, like you'd wave at a goldfish. I waved back. That afternoon, I went to the break room. A junior analyst, a kid named Kevin, who I had trained on SQL databases, was there making tea. He looked around nervously, then slid a folded piece of paper across the counter to me. I saw the draft org chart on the printer, he whispered, terrified. They're erasing you, Riley. It's not right. I took the paper. It was a printout of the new hierarchy. Harper was at the top, Chief Strategy Officer. My name wasn't on the page. Thanks, Kevin, I said softly. Don't worry about it. What are you going to do? He asked. Are you going to sue? Suing takes too long, Kevin, I said, putting the paper in my pocket. And it costs too much money. No, I'm going to do something much worse. What? I'm going to let them have exactly what they want. I walked back to my desk. I cleared my personal items. I took the photo of my dog. I took my lucky stapler. I left the desk bare except for the computer. They wanted to run the show? Fine. I was going to hand them the steering wheel. I just wasn't going to tell them that I had already cut the brake lines. The silence from the C-suite was deafening. For 3 days, I sat in my office with nothing to do. No emails, no meeting invites, no frantic calls from Harold asking where the regulatory binders were. It was the eerie calm of a ghost ship. They were freezing me out, hoping I'd just quit so they wouldn't have to pay the severance package. I used the time to have coffee. Not just any coffee. Strategic coffee. I met with Marcus, one of the independent board members, at a cafe 3 blocks away. Marcus was an old money guy, risk-averse, the kind of guy who wore suspenders non-ironically. He had been skeptical of Harper from day one. It's a mess, Riley, Marcus said, stirring his espresso. Harold is telling the board that Harper has revitalized the deal. He says Wallace is eating out of her hand. Is that what he says? I asked, looking out the window at the pedestrian traffic. Is it true? Marcus looked at me, desperate for the truth. Because if this deal tanks, the stock drops 40%. My portfolio can't take that hit. I didn't complain. I didn't badmouth them. I simply slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a timeline. No emotions, just data. Date, Harper takes over comms. Date, missed deadline for SEC filing. Date, QuantumX fabrication sent to investor. Date, Riley access revoked. Marcus read it. His face went gray. She lied about the tech specs. It's corrected in the data room, I said calmly. But if she tries to sell that lie in the final signing meeting, Wallace will walk. Marcus pocketed the paper. Why are you telling me this? Because I like this company, Marcus. And because when the building catches fire, I want you to know who was playing with matches. I walked back to the office just in time to see a notification on my phone. It was a forwarded calendar invite from Harold. He must have clicked forward to all by mistake, or maybe he just didn't care anymore. Subject, final signing Chen investment attendees. Wallace Chen, Harold, Harper, legal. Location, Boardroom A, Friday, 2:00 p.m. I wasn't on the invite list. I opened the email thread below the invite. Wallace had sent a short note to Harold earlier that morning. Harold, final term sheet review this Friday. All key roles must be present, as discussed. I do not like surprises. Harold's reply was underneath, absolutely, Wallace. The whole leadership team will be there. We are ready to make history. He was lying to Wallace. He was defining leadership team as people named Harold or Harper. He was betting that Wallace wouldn't notice my absence, or that if he did, he wouldn't care enough to stop the check. It was a staggering gamble. It was the kind of arrogance that only comes from people who have never actually had to negotiate for their survival. I sat at my empty desk. The office hummed around me. People walked by, averting their eyes. They knew I was a dead woman walking. They didn't want to catch the contagion of failure. I opened the document one last time, the employment contract I had signed 5 years ago, and the updated key person addendum that was attached to the Chen deal structure. I reread the clause Wallace had circled. It wasn't just a standard clause. It was a key man provision, but updated for modern tech structuring. It tied the valuation of the company specifically to the retention of strategic operational assets. Me, I was the asset. I wasn't just the mechanic, I was the engine. And Harold had just decided to sell the car without checking if the engine was included. I closed the laptop. I picked up my purse. I walked out of the office at 4:00 p.m. on a Thursday. Heading out early, Harper called out from the hallway. She was holding a bottle of champagne, pre-celebrating. Just clearing some headspace for tomorrow, I said. Don't worry about tomorrow, she smirked. We've got it covered. You can probably just zoom in, or take a personal day. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Enjoy the downtime, she said, popping the cork on the bottle. You look tired. I am, I said truthfully. But I think I'll sleep well tonight. I took the elevator down. I didn't go home. I went to a print shop. I printed one copy of the full term sheet. I put it in a plain manila folder. No branding, no logos, just the truth bound in paper. The storm was gathering, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to stop it. I was just waiting for the lightning to strike. Thursday night was a study in contrasts. While I was in my apartment, ironing my best suit, the charcoal Armani that I wore when I needed to look like an executioner, Harold and Harper were at a steakhouse downtown. I know this because Harper posted 14 Instagram stories about it. Closing deals and eating meals, nail polish, #boss babe, #3 billion, #empire state of mind. One video showed Harold raising a glass of red wine. To the new era, he slurred slightly. To the next generation. They looked so happy, so sure. It was almost tragic. They were celebrating a touchdown while the ball was still on the 50-yard line. At 9:00 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was an anonymous email, Proton Mail, untraceable. But I knew the writing style. It was Kevin, the junior analyst. Subject, FYI attachment, draft press release embargoed PDF. I opened it. For immediate release, tech giant secures $3B investment, announces leadership refresh New York, NY, following a historic partnership with Chen Capital. Company name is proud to announce the appointment of Harper last name as Chief Strategy Officer. As part of this restructuring, the company will be parting ways with legacy operational staff to streamline efficiency. Legacy operational staff. That was me. That was my epitaph after 10 years of service. Reduced to 3 words in a press release written by a girl who thought synergy was a personality trait. I stared at the screen. I didn't cry. I think I had passed the point of sadness days ago. Now, I was in a place of cold, crystalline clarity. They weren't just firing me. They were erasing me. They were taking the credit for the deal I built, the relationships I nurtured, the architecture I designed, and they were using the money from that deal to pay for my severance. It was perfect. It was so morally bankrupt it was almost art. I poured myself a glass of water. No alcohol, I needed to be sharp. I sat by the window and watched the city lights. New York is a brutal place. It doesn't care if you're nice. It doesn't care if you're fair. It only cares about leverage. Who has it and who doesn't? Harold and Harper thought they had the leverage because they had the title and the bloodline. They thought power came from the name on the door, but I knew the truth. Power comes from the fine print. I looked at the manila folder sitting on my dining table. It looked innocuous, just a folder. But inside was the lever that could move the world, or at least move $3 billion. I slept for exactly 6 hours. Dreamless sleep. I woke up at 5:00 a.m., did 20 minutes of yoga to center my breathing, and drank black coffee. I put on the suit. I did my makeup, minimal, sharp, war paint. I arrived at the office at 8:00 a.m. The signing wasn't until 2 p.m. The office was buzzing. There were caterers setting up in the lobby, balloons, actual balloons. It looked like a prom, not a merger. Harper breezed in at 11 a.m. He was wearing a white suit, a bold choice. She looked like she was about to get married to a bank account. "Oh, Riley," she said, stopping by my empty desk. "I thought you weren't coming in today." "I have some loose ends to tie up," I said, typing on a blank screen. "Right," she said, checking her reflection in the glass wall. "Well, feel free to grab a cupcake from the lobby, but maybe steer clear of the boardroom later. It's going to be pretty high level. Strictly key players." "Understood." I said, "Strictly key players." She walked away, her heels clicking a rhythm of unearned victory. I waited. I watched the clock. 1 p.m., 1:30 p.m., 1:45 p.m. I saw Wallace Chen arrive. He walked with his entourage, a phalanx of dark suits. He didn't look at the balloons. He looked straight ahead. He walked into the boardroom. Harold followed, looking nervous but excited. Harper followed, practically skipping. The legal team filed in. The door closed. The meeting began. I stood up. I picked up my manila folder. I walked down the hallway. The assistant outside the boardroom tried to stop me. "Riley, sorry, the list is closed." I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and walked into the lion's den. The sound of the door opening was louder than I intended. It echoed off the glass walls and the polished mahogany table. Every head turned. Harold froze mid-sentence. He was standing at the head of the table, holding a glass of sparkling water. Harper was seated next to him, looking annoyed. Wallace Chen sat opposite them, his face unreadable, his hands folded on the table. "Riley," Harold stammered. We're in the middle of the final review." "I know," I said. My voice was steady. Calm, the voice I used when the servers were melting down. "I'm here for the signing." Harper stood up. "Riley, we discussed this. This is a leadership meeting. You're not needed here." "Actually," I said, walking toward the empty chair next to Wallace. "My chair, I think I am." "This is embarrassing," Harper sighed, looking at Wallace with a performative roll of her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Wallace. We have some personnel issues we're working through. Some people have a hard time letting go." Wallace didn't look at her. He was looking at me. His eyes tracked me as I pulled out the chair and sat down. I placed the manila folder on the table. "Personnel issues," Wallace repeated softly. "Yes," Harper said, emboldened by his acknowledgement. She turned to me, her face hardening. She decided to do it right there. She wanted to show Wallace she was the boss. She wanted the kill. "Riley," Harper said, her voice loud, projecting for the room. "Since you can't take a hint, I'll make it clear. We're restructuring the team. We need fresh vision. You're fired. Please leave the building immediately or I'll call security." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. The air left the room. Harold looked like he was about to vomit. He knew this was the wrong time. He knew this was messy, but he couldn't stop her. "Fired," I repeated. "Effective immediately," Harper said, smiling. A cruel, triumphant smile. "Now, get out." I didn't move. I didn't look at her. I turned my head slowly to the right and looked at Wallace Chen. "Wallace," I said, "it appears I am no longer an employee of this company." Wallace lowered his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his fountain pen. He uncapped it. "Who?" Wallace asked. The question hung in the air. Harper blinked. "What? Who is fired?" Wallace asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. Harper pointed a manicured finger at me. "Riley, she's legacy staff. We're clearing the deck." Wallace nodded slowly. He looked at Harold. "Harold, is this accurate? Is Riley no longer with the firm?" Harold stuttered. "Well, Wallace, it's a strategic shift." "We felt that. Is she fired?" Wallace barked. The sound was like a whip crack. "Yes," Harold whispered. "Yes." Wallace didn't scream. He didn't flip the table. He simply closed the leather-bound folder in front of him, the one containing the $3 billion investment agreement. He screwed the cap back onto his pen. "Then this meeting is over," Wallace said. He started to stand up. "Wait," Harper shrieked. "What are you talking about? We're here to sign. The deal is done." Wallace stopped. He looked at Harper with a mixture of pity and disgust. Then he looked at Harold. "You didn't read the term sheet, did you, Harold?" "Legal, read it," Harold gasped. "We all read it." "Not closely enough," Wallace said. He reached over and pulled the manila folder I had placed on the table. He didn't need to open it. He knew what was inside. But he opened it anyway. For theatrical effect. He turned to page 84. "Riley," Wallace said, "would you like to explain Section 12 to your former employers?" I leaned forward. I looked Harper dead in the eyes. "Section 12, paragraph C," I recited from memory. "The key person dependency clause. It states that the investment is contingent upon the continued employment and operational authority of specific key personnel, deemed critical to the asset's stability." Harper laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Yeah, like Dad and me." "No," Wallace said, "not you." He spun the document around and slid it across the table. He pointed to the names listed under the clause. There was Harold's name, and there, right below it, was mine. Riley, last name, head of strategic partnerships. "If Riley leaves," Wallace said, his voice ice cold, "for any reason, termination, resignation, or death, prior to the vesting period of 24 months, the deal is void. The valuation resets. The offer is withdrawn." Harper stared at the page. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Harold grabbed the paper. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled against the table. I didn't know. I thought it was just standard boilerplate." "I don't do boilerplate," Wallace said. "I invest in competence." And frankly, Harold, the only competent person I have met in this entire building is the woman you just fired. Wallace stood up fully now. He buttoned his jacket. So Wallace said, you have a choice. You can walk away from $3 billion or you can walk away from your daughter's tantrum. The trap had snapped shut and they were both caught in the teeth. The room was spinning for Harold. I could see it in his eyes. He was doing the math. $3 billion meant his retirement. It meant his legacy. It meant the golden parachute he had been dreaming about for 20 years. On the other side of the scale was Harper, his daughter, the visionary. Harper, to her credit, didn't understand that she had already lost. She was still fighting a battle that ended 5 minutes ago. This is ridiculous, she scoffed, though her voice wavered. It's a contract. We can amend it. Wallace, surely we can redline that name out. Put me in. I'm the CSO. Wallace looked at her like she was a stain on his carpet. You think you can replace 10 years of institutional knowledge and regulatory relationships with, what was it? Crypto-adjacent leverage? I have an MBA, she shouted. And I have $3 billion, Wallace replied calmly. And right now it's staying in my pocket. He turned to his lawyers. Pack it up. We're done here. The lawyers started closing their laptops. The sound of zippers and clicking latches filled the room. It was the sound of money leaving the building. No, Harold yelled. He slammed his hand on the table. No, wait, Wallace, please, wait. Wallace paused. Why? We can fix this, Harold said, sweat dripping down his nose. He looked at me. His eyes were pleading, desperate. Riley, we didn't mean it. It was a misunderstanding. A lapse in judgment. She fired me, Harold, I said calmly. In front of the investor, that's not a lapse, that's policy. We rescind it. Harold cried, you're not fired. You're promoted. Senior VP, coup. Whatever you want, Dad, Harper gasped. What are you doing? She's undermining us, Harold spun on his daughter. The enabler mask finally fell off, revealing the terrified, greedy man underneath. Shut up, Harper, he hissed. Harper recoiled as if he had slapped her. Excuse me, I said. Shut up, Harold roared. You have no idea what you're doing. You almost cost us everything. He turned back to Wallace. She stays, Riley stays. Harper will step down. Dad, Harper whispered. Tears welling up. Genuine tears this time. The tears of a spoiled child realizing the toy store is closed. You can't be serious. I am perfectly serious, Harold said, his voice trembling. Step down now or you're fired. The silence returned. But this time it wasn't a vacuum, it was heavy. It was the weight of a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Wallace looked at me. Riley, is this acceptable to you? I looked at Harold, sweating and broken. I looked at Harper, crying and humiliated, and I looked at the contract. I could have walked away. I could have let it burn. It would have been poetic. But remember what I said earlier? I'm the mechanic. I fix things. And I had a team of 50 people outside that door who needed this funding to pay their mortgages. Also, I wanted to win, and walking away is losing. Staying and forcing them to look at you every day knowing you own them? That's winning. I have conditions, I said. Name them. Harold said immediately. Full autonomy on the operational budget, I said. Harper is removed from the building completely. Not a demotion, a departure. No consulting fees, no board seat. Done, Harold said. Dad, Harper wailed, and I added, looking at the term sheet. A renegotiation of my equity stake, triple the vesting. Harold didn't even blink. Done. I turned to Wallace. Then we have a deal. Wallace smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile. It was terrifying. Excellent, Wallace said. He opened the leather folder again. He slid the pen to Harold. Sign. Harold signed. His hand shook, but he signed. Now you, Riley, Wallace said. I signed my name next to his. The ink flowed smoothly. Harper stood there, watching her inheritance turn into my leverage. She turned and ran out of the room. The door slammed behind her. Pleasure doing business, Wallace said, capping his pen. The meeting disbanded 10 minutes later. The lawyers shook hands. Wallace nodded to me, a gesture of respect that was worth more than the bonus I had just negotiated, and left. Harold sat in his chair, slumped over, staring at the wall. He looked like a deflated balloon. You played a hard game, Riley, he whispered. I didn't play a game, Harold, I said, standing up and collecting my folder. I did my job. You should try it sometime. I walked out of the boardroom. The balloons were still there. The caterers were putting out trays of shrimp. The staff was gathering, smiling, unaware that they had almost been unemployed 5 minutes ago. I walked toward the elevators. I needed fresh air. I needed to wash the smell of desperation off my suit. I heard sobbing from the emergency stairwell. I pushed the heavy door open. Harper was sitting on the concrete steps, her white suit smudged with dust, crying into her phone. He chose her over me. She was saying to whoever was on the other end. Probably her mom or her Reiki healer. It's so unfair. I had a vision. She looked up and saw me. Her face crumpled into a mask of hatred. You realized you ruined my life, right? She spat. You think you're so smart. You're just a bureaucrat. I stood on the landing looking down at her. Harper, I said softly. I didn't ruin your life. I saved the company. There's a difference. I'm going to start my own firm, she threatened, wiping mascara from her cheek, and I'm going to crush you. Good luck with that, I said, but a piece of advice? Read the contracts, all of them, even the boring parts. I turned to leave. Wait, she called out. How did you know Wallace would back you? I paused, hand on the door handle. Because Harper, I said, Wallace likes money, and I'm the one who makes it. You're just the one who spends it. I walked out onto the street. New York air was cold and smelled of exhaust and roasted nuts. It was the best thing I had ever smelled. I checked my phone. The press release had gone out, but it was different. Tech giant secures $3B investment. Riley last name promoted to chief operating officer. There was no mention of Harper. It was like she never existed. I walked to the corner and hailed a cab. I wasn't going to go celebrate. I wasn't going to post on Instagram. I was going to go home, pour a glass of expensive scotch, and sit in silence. We won. The competent people won. It doesn't happen often. Usually the Harpers of the world fail upwards and the heralds protect them and people like me get restructured into oblivion. But today the fine print held up. I looked out the window as the city blurred by. I felt healed, not happy exactly, but balanced. The scales had tipped back. And to the guy who fixes the AC on the 45th floor, I see you. Keep the air cold. We need it to keep our blood from boiling. I'm Riley. I'm the COO, and I'm never signing a document without reading the footnotes again. Some people confuse nepotism with power, until real money walks in and reminds them who actually holds the pen. Riley didn't need to argue, shout, or defend herself. She just let the paperwork speak. The daughter came in swinging a title, but Riley came in with leverage, earned in silence. In business, respect isn't inherited, it's negotiated. Appreciate you all for sticking through this one. See you in the next story.